Welcome to Lecture 2. Here we're going to start getting into practical academic life communication. So that's going to include our emails, questions, and just kind of everyday formality in this academic environment. So we have a new set of learning modules or learning outcomes for Module 2. And so we're going to start looking at differentiating between academic and workplace communication. What's appropriate in each? How do you understand what's appropriate? How do you create these messages? So, another question kind of start out. How do you know whether you should call a professor doctor or by their first name? There's lots of different options, right? You can say professor blank. A lot of students will say Miss blank. How do you know what's appropriate? So, you can assume, you can look at the professor, you can read their emails, and you can kind of guess what would be appropriate. You can just go ahead and call them something and wait to be corrected. They will hopefully tell you, or you will ask them directly. And so there are, as I'm sure you've already experienced, there's a wide variation in how professors will go about this. And so some will make it very easy to know what you should call them. Some will kind of make it a guessing game, right? So for me, I very, very much do not like to be called Miss, Ms., or Mrs. Scally because I spent a significant amount of time in grad school earning my PhD, right? And so that Dr. Scally actually means something. It's something I achieved, where the Ms., that's not something you achieve. That's just something that exists, right? And you don't have an equivalent of that for Mr. It's just Mr. straight through. So I make it very clear at the beginning of all of my classes that I would actually prefer to be Jamie. I am much more comfortable going by my first name. I have still a little bit of imposter syndrome, and so just the fact that I am a PhD is still kind of weird to me. So I'm more comfortable being Jamie. And I tell students this, I make it quite clear. And sometimes if I am called Ms., or Miss, I will correct students because that really bothers me. If they call me Dr. or Professor Scally, that doesn't bother me, so I won't mention anything about it. So from my side, I will tell students directly, but that's not always going to be the case. And so you need to decide how you're going to approach that. Is this going to be something that's important for you? Do you want to understand the preference of your professors? Do you want to just stick with the formality all the time? Do you want to see if there's the option to kind of maybe have more of an informal relationship? That's something that different departments will vary on, different schools within the university, and then different universities. There are definitely some universities where everybody is Dr. Whoever all the time. There are others, or particular departments, where everybody just goes by their first name, or even maybe just their last name with no title at all attached to it. And so these are norms that you will pick up as you go. But within academia, it's important to understand this. I would say, particularly with your female or female presenting professors, probably it's something that they've encountered as an obstacle more often. So it's just one of those things that's important to be aware of when you're building your fluency in navigating these spaces. So, talking about that, what are some of these everyday academic interactions you would have? It's when you're in class asking a question, before class, after class, in class, right? Approaching a professor in their office hours. Hopefully you attend office hours and you've had this experience yourself. If not, you should try it out, see what it's like. When you're clarifying expectations, a lot of times that will be over an email, right? In my experience, a lot of times it's at or through an email that's 11 o'clock at night, right before the assignment's due at 11:59. So hopefully that's not how you are communicating with your professors, but it's common. And so this will also help you see how maybe that's not the best way to go about doing it. Writing your emails. Within all of that, you are having to kind of play this game of figuring out when does formality matter. First interactions, it's probably a good assumption to kind of go with that always. But then when you're asking for something from somebody, you want to be maybe a little bit more formal than informal because you're asking them to do you a favor. And so with all of this, I mentioned register previously, but what is it? It's the variety of language that you're using to build a particular purpose, audience, social setting. And so some of the key pieces of the register are the formality, right? There's also the context dependence. I've mentioned this again, right? It's really important to understand the situation, the purpose of your communication in that given moment. And then your audience, that's going to change, right? your teacher versus your classmates versus your parents versus your dog, right? And then the features. So the choices in word. What are you actually using to convey that? We have a lot of words that can mean the same thing. So you have to choose one that's going to be appropriate for that given environment. So why does all of this actually matter? So understanding the correct register basically is what allows you to become an effective communicator. It shows that you understand the language tool that you're using and that you are able to adapt to different environments. So you're able to read these cues that we'll talk about more later and adapt your message to make the most sense for that environment. So, some examples of using different types of register, we have formal. So, I regret to inform you, right? That's like kind of standard bad news format, right? So if you're not getting a job, if you're not getting into that grad program, it's going to be pretty standard across the board. And that's a way to kind of take emotion out of it a little bit, make it seem like less of a personal attack. So we keep that formality because it just makes it a little bit more distanced, more casual. So here I talked about like the different language and how many words can mean the same thing. This example with grub, right? So you would say a meal, maybe if you're being more formal, but grub if it's a really casual experience, casual interaction. And so judging how to actually employ these registers in real life, your cues. So that's considering the power difference that you might have. Your professor and your peer, again, you're going to interact differently with them. You're going to interact differently with a professor that you're taking one huge lecture class with than one that you're taking a tiny seminar with, right? Because you'll have built a stronger relationship in that smaller class environment than in the huge class environment. The age difference. So this is a really important one. Generationally, we always tend to kind of build our own communication norms and our own expectations for what is appropriate. So when you're talking to your peers, that kind of style that you'll adopt, the tone, the pacing, the language, all of that is going to be a lot more similar because you have been part of this group that's building its own communication style. When you're talking to a professor, it's going to be different, right? So I'm not that much older than most of you probably, but I'm very much a millennial. And so we have our own different communication styles kind of coming up more before social media was everywhere, where a lot of the younger students now will have a more punctuationless sort of communication style, right? And then if you're looking at even older professors, there's going to be more of an expectation of kind of proper English in a lot of spaces. And so you want to be able to adjust that based on understanding, okay, this is the environment this person kind of came of age in, and these are the norms that they were establishing. Relationship history, right? You build up these things over time and you start to know when you can be casual, when you can be formal with different people. And then just the way that it happens, right? So the same exact message, you might transmit it in the hallway when you're passing somebody in an email over Zoom, and all of those are going to have different expectations for register just because of that modality that you're using. So these are some of our everyday genres of communication in our environments here. So when you're emailing your professors, you want to make sure that you're really clear. This is really important and one of the areas that I've experienced the most issues. Students sending emails without identifying what class they're in, what assignment they're talking about. It's very, very difficult to give a valuable response when you actually have no idea what the question really is because of that. So you need to be clear. You want to be concise, get straight to the point of the question. You don't need to worry about a lot of that extra, more flowery language in this environment, but you do want to be really detailed enough to make sure that the context is understood, the question is understood. On Canvas, when you're sending a message through that, or for us, eCampus, you want to be brief, respectful again, but the way that these messages come in, it doesn't maybe need the whole formatting of an email because you're already in that class on eCampus, right? So it's already known. The message when it comes through, it will be addressed to that class. So if you send me a message here, it's going to show the MDS course number. And so I don't need you to give me that information. I already know it. In person, again, it's going to be much more clear what you're saying. So you can be maybe a little bit more direct because that context isn't necessary. It's given just by being in that space. There's group communication for like student groups that you might be part of, right? And so those are going to tend to be more peers, people that you're working together to accomplish some sort of goal with. And so you can be a little bit more friendly that way, right? Because it's this thing that you've chosen to be a part of, but you are still working towards some sort of goal. You're still kind of setting up that networking or connections for the future. And so you want to have an air of formality, professionalism there as well. And so that said, you can be casual. There's a lot of instances in our lives today where it's completely appropriate to be casual in your communication. For sure, when you're talking to friends and family, but also when you're using emails or text to people that you already know. And so it doesn't mean only people like friends and family that you already know, but if you're working closely with a professor in a lab, you build up that kind of relationship and you can start to judge whether it would be appropriate to be a little bit more casual with this person or whether you should keep that formality kind of based off of what they're giving you as well. And so you can build a lot of that sense of community I talked about in the first lecture with code switching when you're kind of using these communication styles and demonstrating that you are working together. You're part of one. And so just casual communication tends to fit a little bit better there than formal communication, which kind of has this implied distance between the speaker and the receiver. So here our takeaways are that register is part of our language that we use for a particular purpose, and understanding and using it is essential to being an effective communicator. So you need to understand how to manipulate register for different contexts to ensure that you are actually achieving your goals all the time.